The life forged in chains, arrival at Nicopolis. The harbour at Nicopolis awakens before dawn, as harbours have for thousands of years. The gentle lapping of water against weathered stone, the creak of rope and timber as ships rock in their moorings, the distant call of merchants preparing for another day of endless possibility. If you were to arrive here as the sun breaks over the Adriatic, you might mistake it for any prosperous Roman port. But Nicopolis holds something different, something that would change how we think about freedom itself. You know that feeling, don't you? When you finally close your laptop after another 16-hour day, and your body sinks into the mattress, but your mind refuses to dock. It circles like a ship unable to find safe harbor, carrying the weight you carry, turning over the problems that have no easy answers. Tonight, I want to take you to a place where someone discovered something extraordinary about the nature of that weight and what it means to be truly free. Picture yourself stepping onto those worn stone quays 2,000 years ago. The morning air carries the salt tang of the sea mixed with exotic spices from distant lands. Saffron from the east, cinnamon from places whose names exist only in whispers. The visual feast spreads before you like a living tapestry. Ships of every size bob gently on the crystalline water, their masts creating a forest against the pale morning sky. Merchant stalls line the harbor's edge, simple awnings fluttering in the coastal breeze, protecting goods that have traveled further than most people will in their entire lives. But what strikes you most is not the commerce or the constant motion. It's something in the air itself, a sense that this place has become a destination for a different kind of seeker. Men and women who have traveled not for silk or spices, but for something far more precious. Wisdom. Understanding. The kind of knowledge that can transform how you see everything you're building. This is where our story begins. Not with grand proclamations or marble statues, but with the simple truth that some of history's most profound insights came from the most unlikely places. From people who understood constraint, who knew what it meant to carry weight that others couldn't see. In a modest building not far from this harbour, an elderly man sits in the early morning light. His name is Epictetus, though that wasn't the name he was born with. The word means acquired, a slave's name, a reminder that he had once been considered property, a thing to be bought and sold like the goods that flow through this very port. His leg, damaged long ago, causes him to walk with a pronounced limp. Some say it happened during his years in bondage. Others whisper of deliberate cruelty. The truth, like so many truths, matters less than what he made of it. Because this man, who was once owned by another, this man who knew physical constraint in ways most of us never will, discovered a freedom so complete, so unassailable, that emperors and slaves alike would travel across the known world to understand it. Listen to the sounds around you in this harbour scene, the rhythmic splash of oars as fishing boats return with the night's catch, the musical clink of coins changing hands, the polyglot chorus of a dozen languages blending together in the eternal dance of commerce. And underneath it all, something quieter. The sound of sandaled feet walking with purpose toward that modest school, carrying questions that have kept them awake at night. You understand those questions, don't you? They're the same ones that visit you in the small hours when the world is quiet, but your mind refuses to be still. How do you maintain your center when everything around you feels chaotic? How do you make decisions when the stakes feel impossibly high? How do you lead others when you're not even sure you can navigate your own uncertainty? Epictetus knew these questions intimately, but his path to understanding them began in the most unlikely place imaginable, in chains. Imagine, if you will, a young man torn from everything familiar, brought to Rome not as a citizen or a visitor, but as property, assigned to the household of Epictetus, a powerful freedman in Nero's court. This was Rome at its most decadent and dangerous, a place where fortunes rose and fell with imperial whims, where today's favorite could be tomorrow's exile or worse. The young slave who would become Epictetus learned to navigate a world where he controlled almost nothing. His time wasn't his own. His body wasn't his own. His future existed entirely at the pleasure of others. And yet something extraordinary happened in that constraint, something that speaks directly to the weight you carry today. In that marble palace, surrounded by luxury he could never possess, he began to understand a fundamental truth about human nature. He watched senators and courtiers, people with vast external power, reduced to anxiety and fear by things completely outside their control. He saw wealth that couldn't buy peace of mind, status that couldn't provide genuine security, freedom that felt more like prison because it came with so much to lose. And slowly, quietly, a different kind of understanding began to take shape. What if freedom wasn't about external circumstances at all? What if the things that truly mattered, your character, your responses, your inner landscape, what if those were the only things that were ever really yours to control? The harbor sounds continue around us, that eternal rhythm of human activity, of striving and achieving and worrying and hoping. But listen more carefully now. Can you hear it? That subtle difference in Nicopolis. It's the sound of people who have begun to understand something profound about the nature of control itself. Years passed in that Roman household. The young slave studied philosophy, probably with his master's permission or even encouragement. Roman households often educated their more promising slaves. It increased their value, after all. But what happened in this case transcended mere investment. He encountered the works of earlier Stoic philosophers, Chrysippus, Cleanthes, and especially Zeno, the founder of the school, men who had grappled with questions of virtue, wisdom, and the good life. But unlike those earlier thinkers, this student approached philosophy from a unique vantage point. He wasn't a wealthy Athenian debating abstract concepts in marble halls. He was living the fundamental philosophical question every day. What does it mean to be free? Think about your own constraints for a moment. The weight you carry isn't physical chains, but it's real nonetheless. The responsibility for others who depend on you, the financial pressures that follow you home, the decisions that keep you staring at the ceiling long after you should be asleep, the gap between where you are and where you need to be, where you promised others you would be. Epictetus understood this weight, not your specific circumstances, but the fundamental human experience of feeling constrained by forces beyond your immediate control. And what he discovered, what brought people to this harbor town to learn from an old man with a limp, was a way of thinking that transformed constraint into a different kind of strength. The morning is warming now in our harbor scene. The early mist is lifting from the water, revealing the full scope of the port's activity. Ships being loaded for journeys to Alexandria, to Gaul, to the distant edges of the known world. But some of the travelers here aren't looking outward. They're preparing for a different kind of journey entirely. An inward expedition that requires no ship, no supplies, no favorable winds. Just the courage to examine what they actually control and what they don't. Because that's where Epictetus began his teaching, with a simple but revolutionary distinction. Some things are within our control, others are not. And most of human suffering comes from confusing the two. Your reputation, not entirely in your control. Market conditions, definitely not in your control. Whether your team respects your leadership, partially in your control, but not completely. Whether your company succeeds, influenced by your decisions, but not guaranteed by them. But your effort, completely in your control. Your integrity, absolutely yours to determine. How you respond to setbacks, entirely your choice. The values that guide your decisions, no one else can touch those unless you let them. This isn't about passive acceptance or giving up on what you're building. Quite the opposite. It's about focusing your energy where it can actually make a difference. It's about finding a kind of inner freedom that doesn't depend on external outcomes, even as you work tirelessly to influence those outcomes. The elderly philosopher sitting in his simple school near this harbor discovered something that the wealthiest Romans, the most powerful senators, couldn't buy with all their influence. A peace that didn't depend on circumstances, a strength that couldn't be taken away, a freedom that existed regardless of external constraints. But how did he get there? How does someone transform the experience of literal slavery into a philosophy of ultimate liberation? How does someone who controlled almost nothing externally discover absolute mastery of what truly matters? The sun is fully up now over Nicopolis. The harbor hums with purposeful activity. Ships prepare for departure, carrying goods and passengers to destinations across the Mediterranean. But the most important journey happening here isn't measured in miles or marked on any map. It's the journey from external focus to internal mastery. From anxiety about what you can't control to confidence in what you can. And that journey, that transformation from constraint to freedom, begins with understanding exactly how a slave became one of history's most liberated human beings. The story of that transformation and what it means for the weight you carry tonight, that's where we're heading next. But first, let yourself settle into the rhythm of this ancient harbor. Feel the morning sun warming the stone beneath your feet. Smell the salt air mixed with distant spices. And know that you've arrived at a place where someone discovered something extraordinary about the nature of freedom itself. Something that might just change how you think about everything you're building, and the invisible chains that keep you awake at night. And the road to wisdom, early life and influences. The road that brought Epictetus to this harbor. It began not in freedom, but in chains. Not in the marble halls of philosophy, but in the cramped quarters of a Roman household where his very name meant acquired one. Picture, if you will, a different kind of road entirely. Not this coastal path we've been walking, but a dusty thoroughfare leading through the heart of the empire. The Via Appia, perhaps, or one of those sun-baked Roman roads that connected every corner of the known world to the beating heart of power itself. It's morning, and the heat is already beginning to rise from the stones. Olive trees line the way, their silver-green leaves catching what little breeze moves through the Mediterranean air. In the distance, through the shimmer of heat haze, you can make out the walls of a city. But this isn't Nicopolis yet. This is Rome, decades earlier, and the story we need to understand. You know that feeling when you're walking towards something inevitable? When each step forward feels both necessary and uncertain? That's what this road represents. The long journey between who we are and who we might become. Epictetus would have known roads like this intimately. As a young slave, he would have traveled them at his master's bidding, carrying messages, running errands, always moving at someone else's pace towards someone else's destination. The weight he carried then was literal. Packages, letters, the endless demands of a Roman household. But there was another weight too, one you might recognize. The weight of having no control over your time, your choices, your very life. His master was a man named Epictetus. And here's where the story becomes interesting for those of us who lie awake, calculating, planning, trying to control outcomes we can barely influence. Epictetus was no ordinary Roman citizen. He was a freedman himself, someone who had once been enslaved but had earned or bought his way to freedom. He served in the court of Emperor Nero, wielding considerable influence in the most powerful household in the world. Imagine the irony. A former slave who now owned slaves, a man who had climbed from the bottom of society's ladder to very near its top. But here's what makes this relevant to your 2 a.m. thoughts about what you're building. Epictetus understood something about power that many never learn. He knew it was fragile, temporary, subject to forces beyond anyone's control. You see, Epictetus had witnessed the fall of emperors. He had seen fortunes made and lost in a single day. He had watched as the most powerful men in Rome discovered that their power was, in many ways, an illusion. And perhaps because of this, or perhaps despite it, he had developed an interest in philosophy. Not the dry, academic philosophy of the schools, but the practical wisdom that might help a person navigate uncertainty, the kind of thinking that might offer peace in the midst of chaos. And so, in his household, alongside the usual business of a Roman court official, there were books, scrolls containing the works of earlier Stoic philosophers, conversations that went deeper than the day's political maneuvering, questions about what really mattered, what could truly be controlled, what constituted a life well lived. This is where young Epictetus first encountered ideas that would change everything, not in a classroom or a grand lecture hall, but in the margins of someone else's life. While polishing bronze or preparing meals, he overheard discussions about virtue and wisdom. While running errands through Rome's crowded streets, he carried in his mind fragments of philosophy that spoke to something deep within him. Think about your own education in leadership, in building something meaningful. How much of it happened in formal settings and how much came from observing, listening, absorbing wisdom wherever you could find it. How many of your most important insights came not from textbooks, but from watching how others handled pressure, made decisions, faced uncertainty. Epictetus was learning, but he was learning as someone with no official right to learn. His time was not his own. His attention was supposed to be focused entirely on his master's needs. Yet somehow, in the spaces between servitude, he was building something internal that no one could take away. The ancient sources tell us he was born with a physical disability, a limp that would stay with him throughout his life. Some say it was from birth, others that it resulted from harsh treatment as a slave. The truth is lost to history, but the reality remains. He carried visible limitations alongside invisible ones. And yet, and this is crucial for understanding what we're really talking about, these constraints became the very foundation of his freedom. You might wonder how someone in chains could think meaningfully about liberty, how someone who couldn't control where he lived or how he spent his days could develop a philosophy of empowerment. But that's exactly the point. The most profound insights about freedom often come from those who have experienced its absence. Late at night in that Roman household, when the day's work was done and the master's demands had been met, Epictetus would have had moments, brief windows of time that belonged to him alone. And in those moments, he was learning to distinguish between what he could and couldn't control. He couldn't control his legal status. He couldn't control his master's moods or demands. He couldn't control the political upheavals that regularly shook Rome. He couldn't even control his own physical limitations. But he could control his responses, his thoughts, his character, the story he told himself about what was happening to him. This wasn't resignation, it was recognition. The recognition that there's a space between what happens to us and how we choose to meet it. And in that space, that's where real freedom lives. As we walk this dusty road toward understanding, consider your own constraints, the market forces you can't control, the team members who might leave, the competitors who emerge overnight, the regulations that change without warning, the global events that reshape entire industries. These are your chains, in a sense, not literal but real nonetheless. And like Epictetus, you're learning to build something meaningful despite them, or perhaps because of them. The road we're walking leads forward through time, from that Roman household to the harbor at Nicopolis where we began, from slavery to teaching, from constraint to a kind of freedom that even emperors envied. But first, there would be more lessons, harder ones, the kind that can only be learned when everything you think you can count on disappears. The sun is higher now on our imagined road, the shadows shorter, the heat more intense. But we keep walking because this is how wisdom comes, not all at once, but step by step, mile by mile, year by year. And somewhere ahead, through the shimmer of heat and time, a different kind of destination awaits. Finding peace within the Nicopolis school. That destination is a place of unexpected peace. Picture, if you will, stepping off that dusty Roman road and through a simple wooden car. The noise of the world fades. Your shoulders, which have been carrying tension you didn't even notice, begin to drop. The weight you carry. It doesn't disappear, but somehow it feels different here. This is Nicopolis. Not the bustling harbor we glimpsed earlier, but a quieter quarter of the city. Here, in the year 94 AD, Epictetus has done something remarkable. After Emperor Domitian expelled all philosophers from Rome, after losing what little security a former slave might claim, Epictetus chose not to rage against his circumstances. Instead, he did what Stoics do best. He adapted. He built something new. The school he created wasn't grand by Roman standards. No marble columns reaching toward the heavens, no gilded statues of forgotten emperors, just simplicity, functionality, peace. Walk with me through these modest buildings. Feel the smooth stone beneath your feet, worn by countless students who came seeking what you seek now. A way to quiet the endless chatter of an overworked mind. The walls are whitewashed, clean but weathered. They've absorbed decades of wisdom, witnessed thousands of conversations about what truly matters. And here is the heart of it all. Step into this small courtyard garden. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Do you hear it? The gentle trickle of water flowing from a simple stone fountain into a basin below. It's been flowing like this for nearly 2,000 years, or at least fountains like it have, the same eternal rhythm. Constant, but never exactly the same. Open your eyes now. See how the late afternoon light filters through the leaves of the olive tree in the corner. Notice the herbs growing in terracotta pots along the whitewashed walls: rosemary, thyme, sage. Their scent mingles with the clean smell of wet stone. This isn't luxury. It's something better. It's intentionality. Epictetus designed this space for minds like yours, minds that have spent the day juggling decisions, managing people, solving problems that seem to multiply faster than solutions. He understood that wisdom can't take root in chaos. It needs stillness. Not the forced stillness of exhaustion, but the chosen stillness of someone who has learned to distinguish between what they can control and what they cannot. Sit on this simple stone bench, worn smooth by generations of students. Feel how it's positioned perfectly to catch the sound of the fountain while facing away from the gate, away from the world of urgent demands and endless complications. This is where Epictetus would gather his students each morning. Not to fill their heads with more information, they had enough of that, but to help them understand something far more valuable. How to be free, regardless of their circumstances. You are not your business, he would tell them, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had lost everything and discovered it was enough. You are not your setbacks, you are not even your successes. You are the consciousness that observes all these things and chooses how to respond. Listen to the fountain for a moment. Notice how it doesn't fight against gravity. It doesn't resist the shape of the stone that guides its flow. It simply flows, finding the path of least resistance while still reaching its destination. This was Epictetus's first great teaching. Acceptance, not passive resignation, but active acknowledgement of reality as it is, not as we wish it were. The deals that fell through, the team member who disappointed you, the market conditions that shifted overnight, the sleepless nights that brought you here, to this moment, listening to these words. What if all of it was exactly as it needed to be? Some things are within our power, Epictetus would say, settling onto his teaching chair in this very courtyard, while others are not. His students would lean forward, these merchants and soldiers and civic leaders, all carrying their own invisible weights. Within our power are our opinion, our motivation, our desire, our aversion, and our mental faculties. Not within our power are our body, our property, our reputation, our position, and whatever is not our own mental work. Feel how radical this idea was, and still is. In a world that constantly tells you to control outcomes, manage perceptions, force results, here was a man saying the only true control lies within. Your thoughts, your responses, your character. The second pillar of his teaching grew naturally from the first. Self-discipline, but not the grinding, white-knuckled discipline of someone fighting against themselves. Something subtler. The discipline of the fountain, finding the most natural path toward what truly matters. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he would remind them. That project you've been forcing, perhaps it's time to let it flow in a different direction. That relationship that's causing constant friction. Maybe the discipline isn't in trying harder, but in accepting what it actually is. Watch how the light is changing in our courtyard now. The sun is lower, casting longer shadows, but the fountain keeps flowing. The herbs keep growing. The stone bench remains solid and welcoming. Some things endure not because they resist change, but because they embody principles that transcend circumstances. This brings us to Epictetus's third great teaching. Virtue, not virtue as a list of rules to follow, but virtue as a way of being. The courage to face uncertainty without pretending you're not afraid. The justice to treat people fairly, even when they don't reciprocate. The wisdom to know the difference between problems you can solve and problems you must simply navigate. The temperance to want what you have, rather than constantly reaching for what you lack. Wealth consists in not having great possessions, he would tell his students as the evening light faded, but in having few wants. Look around this simple courtyard one more time. See how it contains everything needed for peace, but nothing extra. The fountain provides the sound of flowing water. The herbs offer their quiet fragrance. The bench gives a place to rest. The walls create shelter without creating prison. This is what you're building, isn't it? Not just a business or a career or a legacy, but a life, a way of being that can remain centered regardless of external storms. A kind of internal courtyard where you can always return, No matter how chaotic the world becomes, the students would eventually leave this place, returning to their ships and their shops and their civic duties. But they carried something with them, a different relationship to the weight they bore. Not lighter, but more purposeful. Not easier, but more sustainable. As our imagined visit to this ancient courtyard draws toward evening, feel how your own breathing has perhaps slowed to match the rhythm of the fountain. How your thoughts have perhaps found a bit more space between them. This is what Epictetus offered. Not escape from responsibility, but a different way of carrying it. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. The fountain keeps flowing. The herbs keep growing. The stone remains solid beneath you. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, wisdom continues its patient work. Simple living, profound thoughts. As the last light fades from the courtyard, we follow a narrow path worn smooth by countless footsteps. It leads to a simple dwelling where Epictetus shares his evening meal with a handful of students. The room is modest, almost austere by the standards of Rome's wealthy districts. A single wooden table, scarred by years of use, simple clay bowls, a loaf of bread, its crust golden in the lamplight, a small dish of olives, their oil catching the flame's gentle flicker, a jug of water, nothing more. You might recognize something in this scene. Perhaps it reminds you of those rare moments when you've stepped away from the endless complexity of what you're building, when you've sat with something simple and found it surprisingly complete. Epictetus breaks the bread with hands that have known both chains and freedom. His movements are unhurried, deliberate. There's no urgency here, no sense that this meal is merely fuel for the next task. Instead, there's presence, attention, gratitude for what is, rather than anxiety about what might be. The wise person, he tells his students, his voice carrying the same measured cadence you've come to know, is not the one who has much, but the one who needs little. The words settle into the quiet room like stones into still water. One of his students, a young man whose father has sent him here to learn virtue rather than rhetoric, shifts uncomfortably. You can see the question forming in his eyes. The same question that might arise in your own mind as you lie there, carrying the weight of salaries and growth targets and investor expectations. How can needing little possibly be wisdom when so many people depend on what you're building? Epictetus seems to read this unspoken thought. He takes a single olive, holds it up to catch the lamplight. "Tell me," he says to the young man, "what makes this olive valuable?" The student considers. Its taste, its nourishment. And if I had 1,000 olives instead of 10, you would be better fed. Epictetus smiles, that gentle expression you've glimpsed before. Or I would spend my time worrying about storing 990 olives, about whether they might spoil, about who might try to take them from me, about whether having them makes me better than my neighbor who has only 5. He places the olive back in the dish. The olive's value doesn't change based on how many I possess, but my peace of mind, that changes dramatically. You feel this truth settling somewhere deeper than your thoughts. How often has the weight you carry grown, not because your responsibilities truly expanded, but because your relationship to them shifted? How many nights have you lain awake, not because today's challenges were insurmountable, but because tomorrow's possibilities felt infinite and demanding? The meal continues in comfortable silence. There's something profound happening here, though it would be easy to miss. These men aren't just eating. They're practicing a form of meditation, each bite received with attention, each moment of conversation welcomed rather than rushed. This is what Epictetus means by simple living, not poverty for its own sake, but clarity about what actually nourishes. Not deprivation, but discrimination. The ability to distinguish between what serves your deepest purposes and what merely complicates them. After the meal, as the students help clear the simple dishes, Epictetus moves outside to a worn stone bench beneath an ancient fig tree. The bark is gnarled and weathered, testament to decades of seasons weathered and survived. Above, the first stars are beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. This is his evening practice. Not elaborate ritual, but simple presence, sitting with the day that has passed, the night that approaches, the eternal rhythm that contains them both. You might imagine settling beside him on that stone bench. feeling its solid coolness beneath you, worn smooth by countless evenings of contemplation. The fig tree's leaves whisper overhead, stirring in the gentle breeze that carries the scent of herbs from the courtyard garden. Each day, Epictetus says quietly, speaking as much to the evening air as to any listener, we have the opportunity to practice dying well. The phrase might sound morbid if you heard it in daylight, in the midst of your busy concerns. But here, in this peaceful darkness, it carries a different meaning. He's not speaking of death as ending, but as release, the daily practice of letting go of what was never truly yours to control. The deals that didn't close as expected, the team member who chose a different path, the market conditions that shifted without consulting your carefully laid plans, the investor who said no, the customer who walked away. Each evening, you have the choice to carry these things forward into tomorrow, or to practice the small death of releasing them. Not abandoning responsibility, but distinguishing between what serves your mission and what merely feeds your ego's endless hunger for control. Epictetus reaches up and plucks a fig from the tree above. Even in the dim light, you can see it's perfectly ripe. Soft to the touch, sweet with the day's accumulated sunshine, he eats it slowly, mindfully. Tomorrow this tree will offer another fig, he says. I don't need to pick them all tonight out of fear that tomorrow's fruit might not come. I don't need to analyze why this fig tastes as it does, or strategize about the optimal fig-eating approach. His voice carries a gentle humor now. I simply receive what is offered when it's offered, with gratitude for the tree's generosity and trust in its continued abundance. The metaphor isn't lost on you. How much energy do you spend trying to harvest tomorrow's opportunities today? How often does your planning become a form of anxiety, your preparation a way of avoiding trust in your own resilience? The night deepens around the fig tree. Epictetus sits in comfortable silence, his breathing slow and even. There's no agenda here, no goal beyond presence itself. This is perhaps the most radical aspect of his teaching. The idea that being fully where you are, when you are, might be the highest form of productivity. Not because it leads to better outcomes, though it often does, but because it returns you to the simple truth that this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, is the only place where life actually happens. Everything else, the strategies and projections, the fears and ambitions, the weight of what you're building, and the pressure of what others expect, all of it exists in the realm of thought. Important, yes. Worthy of attention, certainly, but not the whole of existence. Here, beneath the fig tree, with the stone bench solid beneath you and the stars emerging overhead, you remember what Epictetus discovered in his years of teaching. That simple living isn't about having less. It's about needing less from what you have. It's about finding the profound within the ordinary, the eternal within the temporary. The fountain still flows in the courtyard behind you. The herbs still release their gentle fragrance into the night air. And somewhere in this ancient rhythm of simplicity and presence, your own breathing begins to deepen. Your own thoughts begin to settle, like sediment in still water, gradually revealing the clarity that was always there beneath. The enduring wisdom, Arrian's record. As the night deepens around this ancient place of learning, we find ourselves drawn to another corner of Epictetus's world, a quieter space where the weight of preservation meets the lightness of wisdom. Here, in a chamber lined with wooden shelves, sits a young man bent over parchment by the glow of an oil lamp. His name is Arrian, and in his careful measured strokes across the papyrus, he is capturing something that might otherwise vanish like morning mist. You see, Epictetus himself wrote nothing down. Like the great teachers of old, he trusted in the living word, the immediate connection between speaker and listener, the kind of presence you might recognize from your own most meaningful conversations. Those moments when someone's wisdom lands not just in your mind, but somewhere deeper. But Arrian understood something profound about the nature of what he was witnessing. He saw that these teachings, these gentle redirections of attention from what we cannot control to what we can, these invitations to find freedom within constraint, they deserved to outlast the voice that spoke them. Listen to the scratch of his reed pen against the parchment, each stroke preserving not just words, but the very spirit of transformation he had witnessed in that courtyard garden. The sound is rhythmic, meditative, like the fountain that still flows behind you, carrying something essential from one moment to the next. What Arian created would become known as the Discourses, and later a smaller collection called the Enchiridion, meaning the handbook. A manual small enough to carry, practical enough to consult when the weight you carry feels heaviest. Imagine the shelves around him, filled with scrolls containing the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Plato's dialogues, Aristotle's observations, the poems of Homer, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of human understanding. And now, Arian adds another thread, the voice of the former slave who found perfect freedom. The oil lamp flickers slightly, casting dancing shadows across the parchment. In this gentle, wavering light, words take shape that will travel across 2 millennia to reach you here, tonight, as you finally allow your own thoughts to slow. You are not your body and hair, Arian records, but choice and the acts of choice. Let that settle for a moment. You are not the exhaustion in your shoulders, not the tension in your jaw, not even the endless stream of decisions that fill your days. You are the awareness that chooses how to meet each moment, the consciousness that can step back from the urgency and ask, what really matters here? The lamp burns steadier narrower, its flame finding that perfect balance between fuel and air, between effort and ease. Much like what you're building in your own life, that delicate equilibrium between action and acceptance, between caring deeply and holding lightly. Arian's pen moves to capture another teaching. Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants. How different this sounds from the endless accumulation that surrounds us, the constant pressure to have more, do more, be more. Yet here in this quiet chamber, surrounded by the true treasures, wisdom preserved in simple words, we glimpse another way of measuring richness. The richness of a mind that has learned to want what it has. The abundance of a heart that has discovered contentment within constraint. The prosperity of a spirit that finds freedom not by breaking every boundary, but by choosing wisely within the boundaries that remain. You can almost smell the papyrus, that earthy, organic scent of material that will carry immaterial truths. Feel the texture of the reed pen between Arian's fingers, smooth from use, responsive to the slightest pressure. These simple tools, preserving something more durable than bronze, more lasting than marble. Another passage takes shape under his careful attention. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Think of all the scrolls on these shelves that recorded the rise and fall of empires, the victories of generals, the accumulation of territories and treasures. All of it dust now, but this simple insight, this redirection of attention from circumstance to response, this continues to breathe life into weary souls across the centuries. The lamp flame grows more steady still, as if settling into its own rhythm of burning, not consuming frantically, not struggling against the darkness, simply doing what flames do, transforming fuel into light, moment by moment, breath by breath. Arian pauses in his writing, sets down his pen, and looks up at the shelves around him. In the flickering light, each scroll seems to hold its own quiet presence. The accumulated wisdom of generations, not competing for attention, but offering their gifts to anyone willing to slow down enough to receive them. This is what preservation looks like, not the frantic grasping after permanence, but the patient work of passing something valuable from one hand to another, from one generation to the next, from one moment of understanding to another. The teachings Arian records tonight will travel through copying rooms in Constantinople, through monastery libraries in medieval Europe, through printing houses in Renaissance Italy, through countless translations and editions, until they arrive here now, in this quiet space you've created for yourself. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, the parchment now reads. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Feel how that lands in your chest, that invitation to release your grip on outcomes you cannot guarantee, on responses you cannot control, on circumstances that will unfold according to their own logic, regardless of how much mental energy you spend trying to direct them. The oil lamp burns lower now, not dimming but settling into a more sustainable rhythm. Like your own breathing, which has perhaps grown deeper without your noticing, more regular, more trusting in the body's ancient wisdom of rest. Arian rolls the completed parchment carefully, ties it with a simple cord, and places it among the other scrolls. Tomorrow it will be copied, and those copies will be copied. And somewhere in that patient chain of preservation, the voice of Epictetus continues, speaking to anyone who needs to hear that freedom is possible. Even here, even now, even under the weight of all you carry. The flame flickers once more, then finds its steady rhythm again, illuminating not just the chamber around you, but something deeper, the recognition that wisdom, like light, is meant to be shared, passed along, received with gratitude and offered with generosity. In the growing quietness, you can almost hear the scratch of reed on papyrus, the sound of one moment caring enough about the next to preserve what matters most, the gentle insistence that what you're building, like what Arian preserved, is part of something larger, something that connects you to every other soul who has ever chosen presence over panic, acceptance over resistance, the long view over the urgent moment. Hank, a view from above, acceptance and perspective. The morning light finds us climbing, stepping away from the sheltered courtyard where Arian's careful work preserved these teachings, moving upward along a winding path that leads to higher ground. The stones beneath our feet are worn smooth by countless others who have sought this same elevated view, this same need to step back from the immediate and see the larger pattern. Here on this gentle hillside overlooking Nicopolis, the harbor spreads below us like a living map. The ships that seemed so large and urgent from the water's edge now appear as delicate models, their importance unchanged, but their proportion restored. The bustling streets where merchants called their wares and students hurried between lessons, now quiet ribbons of possibility threading through the ancient city. This is what Epictetus offered his students, not escape from their concerns, but perspective on them. The view from above, where what feels overwhelming at close range reveals its true place in the broader landscape of a life. You know this feeling, those rare moments when you step back from the daily urgency and remember the longer arc of what you're building. When the decision that kept you awake last night finds its proper size, still important, still requiring your attention, but no longer consuming the entire horizon of your thoughts. The morning air here carries the scent of wild herbs, thyme and oregano growing in the spaces between stones, life finding its way without force or struggle. Below us, the harbor continues its ancient rhythm, ships arriving and departing, cargo loaded and unloaded, the eternal dance of human endeavor that Epictetus watched with such patient understanding. You are not your circumstances, he would tell his students from vantage points like this. You are how you respond to them. The ship delayed by weather, the business deal that falls through, the partnership that doesn't unfold as planned. These are simply the raw material of character, the clay from which virtue is shaped. From this height, we can see how the harbor serves the city, how the city serves the region, how individual effort connects to something far grander than any single ambition. Your late nights and difficult decisions, the weight you carry and the responsibility you hold, these too are part of a pattern larger than their immediate pressure suggests. The Stoics had a practice they called the view from above, deliberately imagining themselves from a great height, seeing their concerns in the context of their neighborhood, their city, their time, the vast sweep of human experience. Not to diminish the importance of their work, but to restore its proper proportion, to remember that virtue and character matter more than any particular outcome. This is acceptance in its truest form, not passive resignation, but clear-eyed recognition of what belongs to you and what doesn't. The market conditions, the regulatory changes, the competitors' moves, these flow around your efforts like weather around this hillside. You cannot control them, but you can control your response, your preparation, your commitment to doing what is right regardless of external circumstances. A hawk circles overhead, riding the thermal currents with such effortless grace, not fighting the wind, but using it, finding lift in the very forces that might seem like obstacles. This is the freedom Epictetus discovered, not the absence of constraints, but the mastery of working within them, finding opportunity in limitation, strength in acceptance. The scrolls in Arian's collection below us, each one represents someone who found this same perspective, this same understanding that what we build with integrity becomes part of something imperishable, your company, your team, the value you create. These matter precisely because they serve something beyond themselves, because they contribute to the great human project of flourishing, of creating conditions where others can thrive. The sun climbs higher now, warming the stones around us, drawing the morning mist from the valleys below. What seemed unclear in the pre-dawn darkness now reveals its simple beauty. The way challenges that feel insurmountable in the small hours often find their resolution in the broader light of day. This is what the view from above offers. Not answers to every question, but the right size for every concern. The understanding that what you're building is both deeply important and part of something much larger than any individual effort. That your commitment to doing good work, to treating people well, to building something worthy, connects you to every other person who has ever chosen virtue over expedience, character over convenience. The path that brought us here continues upward, but for now this vista is enough. This reminder that perspective itself is a form of wisdom, that stepping back allows us to step forward with greater clarity, that acceptance and ambition, peace and purpose, are not opposites but partners in the work of a life well lived. Legacy of light, from this hillside, these ancient stones beneath our feet, we can see how wisdom travels not through conquest but through quiet transmission. One conversation, one moment of understanding, one choice to respond rather than react, spreading outward like ripples on still water. The ruins of Nicopolis stretch below us in the gathering dusk. Walls that once echoed with the voices of merchants and soldiers, now silent, yet Epictetus's words, spoken in a simple courtyard, continue to resonate across centuries, reaching you tonight. In this moment when you most need to remember that the weight you carry, the challenges that seem insurmountable, are part of a larger pattern, a greater conversation about what it means to be human. Look how the last light catches the broken columns, these fragments of empire, while overhead, the same stars that watched over his students begin to emerge, constant, patient, indifferent to our anxieties about tomorrow's meetings, this quarter's numbers, the decisions that feel so urgent in the small hours of sleepless nights. The former slave who became free by understanding freedom, who found wealth in wanting less, who discovered strength in accepting what he could not change, speaks to something timeless in the work you do. Because every choice you make to treat people with dignity, every moment you choose patience over frustration, every time you focus on what you can control rather than what you cannot, you participate in something larger than quarterly results, something more enduring than market cycles. The oil lamp that burned in Aryan's study, that steady flame preserving wisdom for future generations, burns still in the choices you make, the example you set, the way you respond when everything seems to be falling apart. Your leadership, quiet, imperfect, human, becomes part of this long conversation about what matters, about how to live well in a world that often seems designed to prevent it. The amphitheater below us sits empty now, grass growing between ancient stones. But listen, can you hear it? The echo of voices, students asking the questions you ask. How do I find peace when everything demands urgency? How do I maintain perspective when the stakes feel so high? How do I lead with wisdom when I feel so uncertain? The same questions, the same search for understanding, the same need for something solid to stand on when the ground keeps shifting. Above us, the stars emerge more clearly as darkness deepens, that vast perspective Epictetus taught his students to embrace. The view from above that makes our daily struggles not insignificant but properly proportioned, part of something magnificent and mysterious. This brief opportunity to participate in the ancient work of building, creating, serving, choosing virtue over expedience, character over convenience, again and again and again. The Mediterranean stretches eastward toward the horizon, dark water reflecting starlight, carrying the memory of countless ships, countless journeys, countless people who faced their own versions of your challenges, who lay awake wondering if they were strong enough, wise enough, good enough for what they were trying to build. Most of their names are forgotten, their companies dissolved, their empires crumbled, but the kindness they showed, the integrity they maintained, the moments they chose the harder right over the easier wrong. These ripple forward, invisible, eternal, part of the fabric of human flourishing. Feel how the evening air moves across this ancient landscape, carrying the scent of wild herbs, the salt of distant seas, the dust of civilizations that rose and fell while the deeper truths endured. The anxiety that keeps you awake, the weight that feels so personal, so immediate, takes its place in this larger story, not diminished but dignified. Part of the eternal human struggle to live with purpose, to build something worthy, to leave things better than we found them. In the east, beyond the dark water, the faintest suggestion of dawn begins to touch the horizon. Not yet light, but the promise of light. The reminder that what feels like endless night always gives way to morning, to new possibilities, to another chance to apply what we've learned, to choose response over reaction, acceptance over resistance, wisdom over worry. The empty amphitheater below, the scattered stones, the wild grass reclaiming ancient pathways, all of it testament to impermanence, to the truth that nothing lasts forever, not your current struggles, not the problems that seem so overwhelming, not even the successes you've worked so hard to achieve, but also testament to continuity, to the way ideas outlive empires, to how one person choosing virtue in a small courtyard in a forgotten city can speak across 2,000 years to someone lying awake in the darkness, wondering if they have what it takes, and finding, in the space between one breath and the next, in the pause between worry and peace, in the eternal present moment where all wisdom lives, that they do, they always have, they always will. Because freedom, real freedom, the kind that no circumstance can touch, lives not in what happens to us, but in how we choose to meet what happens, with grace, with courage, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing we are part of something larger, something lasting, something infinitely worth the weight we carry and the love we pour into what we're building.